Hello. The story of the book that you see here, The Boundary of Liberty and Tolerance, started in August 1985. At that time, I was a political activist in Israel, and I very much objected a political movement that was in Israel since the 1970s called Kach, that was headed by a Jewish rabbi. His name was Meir Kahane. Meir Kahane believed that Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, belongs only to Jews, and that Arabs have no place in that place, in Israel. They need to leave. So he offered to transfer them outside of Israel. Israeli citizens that have been living there for many, many years, far more years than he, an immigrant to Israel. He arrived in the 70s to Israel. And he used very derogatory words when he referred to them. He was a blatant racist. And I objected to his ideas as a human rights activist, as a person who believes in peace, in tolerance, in equality. And Kahane was going around the country and promoting his vile ideas. And at one evening, he arrived at my town, which was Givatayim, a small city outside of Tel Aviv, at the outskirts of Tel Aviv. And when he arrived, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people that were gathered in this small square, coming with the aim to protest against him and his ideas and whatever he represents. And at some point, he went into the podium and wanted to start his speech. And as he was about to start his speech, the air was filled with cacophony of noise, of screams, shouts, whistles that did not stop. Kahane could not be heard. It was impossible to hear him. And I was standing there and I was baffled because I did not expect this. I expect people to protest against him and his ideas. I did not expect that people who come to protest against his ideas are going to deny him the right of freedom of expression. In the name of freedom, they were denying that person free speech. And that person, Kahane, who had no problems to deny fundamental rights to others, was trying to speak up to no avail. This paradox fascinated me. 2 years later, I decided to focus my doctoral dissertation on that subject. I went to Oxford University. And the book that you see here, The Boundaries of Liberty and Tolerance, is the byproduct of that dissertation. After the dissertation, I published the book. I finished my doctorate in 1991, and the book came in 1994. And what I've done in this book, I developed a theory of democracy on the defense. I call it the democratic catch, or the catch of democracy, explaining the very foundations of democracy, for instance, liberty and tolerance, might bring about the destruction of democracy if you do not introduce any boundaries. So the very first chapters of the book set the agenda, describe the theory, explain what are the foundations of freedom, liberty, tolerance, and then more particularly, what are the foundations of free speech. I spoke about the rationale of respect for others as one of the main rationales for freedom of expression. And then I spoke about the idea of the truth principle from John Stuart Mill philosophy. And then when describing the restrictions, I spoke about the million harm principle, which can be phrased also in the words of sage Hillel, and now I'm not going to speak in Hebrew, מה ששנוא עליך אל תעשה לרעך, meaning whatever is hateful to you, do not do unto others. And I also presented the idea that sometimes offense can be morally on a par with physical harm and may constitute grounds for limitations on free speech. In order to illustrate how the harm principle and the offense principle can come alive, can be translated into reality, I analyzed a case study that happened in the United States, in Chicago during the 1970s, when a small group of Nazis, headed by Frank Collin, wanted to strut in the city of Skokie, which is a suburb of Chicago, that was populated at that time by thousands of Holocaust survivors. And Frank Collins said quite explicitly, I'm coming to Skokie in order to offend the Jews. And then I present the question, is this legitimate speech? Is it should be allowed? The chapter on Skokie is the linchpin between the theory and then the application of the theory, because from Skokie I'm moving on to the study of the struggle against Kahanism, the ideology of Meir Kahane in Israel. Because when Kahane rose, he was elected to the Knesset as the sole member Knesset of his party, Kach. The entire Israeli establishment was recruited to fight against him. And almost unprecedentedly, we found that elements of the right and elements of the left said, this is beyond tolerance. We cannot digest this phenomenon. So in the remainder of the book, I explain who is Meir Kahane, I explain his ideology, and I explain the steps that Israeli democracy took in order to defend itself against this challenge of Kahanism. Kahane himself ended his life quite brutally in 1991 when he came to Brooklyn, the place where he was born, in New York, and he was assassinated by a zealot who did not appreciate his ideas. Meir Kahane is dead. His ideas are very much alive. Unfortunately, Kahanism took roots in Israel, and Kahanism has followers to this day. So you can read my theory about the boundaries of liberty and tolerance in this book. Enjoy your reading.